People do not agree on what direction Deltarune is gonna go in. Kris being the knight is considered a bit controversial, and you might know that already. I didn't really think too much of it at first. I was pretty neutral, but now I'm a big Kris Knighter. Not much else makes sense. New chapters are right around the corner, and I want to prove that I am right, and that you're wrong, and that you're dumb. I'm smart. I've had a bunch of stuff written out for this theory that I would just copy-paste whenever someone said something that would grind my gears. Instead of doing that anymore, I thought I would just put everything all together into something cohesive and with structure. I love Deltarune, and I've already showed it love with White Peewees, but I want to do it even more. Mr. Fox over here has written a lot of enticing mysteries. No need for a long intro or anything. Let's just get cracking. Kris is an interesting character. Despite being a silent protagonist, there's a lot going on between the lines and lore-wise. Kris is in the shadow of Asriel. They're considered a bit weird. You also see them do weird stuff during the endings of the chapters. This is where the biggest evidence for them being the knight comes from. They make a fountain. Literally. If you interpret Kris as the knight with these endings, then they made the chapter 2 and chapter 3 fountains. People like to say that the chapter 1 ending was just bait and switch. All Kris did that night was eat a pie, and that's it. It's just shit writing, it's bad. The game going out of its way to show something important only for it to be a joke and irrelevant to the plot. Why have the ending to chapter 2 set up the next chapter? Is it just a gas leak? Structurally, it would be weird if they weren't the knight. Chapter 1 sets up chapter 2, and so on and so forth. It makes sense, just from a glance. But, let's just look at evidence. I don't think the pie thing was entirely bait and switch anyway. It treats itself like it is one, but there is actually more to it. There's one thing people never talk about, and it's the actual pie. If Kris never ate the pie, then Toriel and Susie wouldn't be making a new pie together in chapter 2, while Kris is at the toilet, cutting the tires without anyone knowing it's them. The car not working ends up being important in the end of chapter 2, and is setting up chapter 3. There's stuff going on with the opening text in both chapters. The opening with the text could very much be an earlier memory, similar to when you fall on the flowers in Undertale, though there's already a moment like this in the game. Doesn't mean there can't be more. It's very clear Toriel didn't say this. It acts like it interrupts the other text. This is Toriel talking. Listen to the voice sound. But it could still be an earlier memory. This is irrelevant to the theory, but it shows that there's definitely more to these intros and endings. It acts like a joke, but there's more going on underneath. It's not bait and switch in the way you think. You might brush it off as coincidence, but the pie thing is not the only thing they planned. It's weird how if you interact with the TV in chapter 1, it says that it's not plugged in and that it hasn't been used in a while. In chapter 2, when you interact with it, it says that it's plugged in, but it's dusty. I don't think Toriel turned on the TV just for Susie and Kris to watch on it. It was Susie that actually put it on anyways. She actually found the remote under the sofa pillows. And that was dusty as well. It's probably Kris that plugged it in. When talking to Toriel in chapter 1, she talks about how Kris and Asriel played a lot of games together. Now Asriel's gone to college. Ralsei! Yes. It's very clear that it hasn't been used in a while. It's clear Kris knows a lot more than we know. Speculation comes later. This TV actually debunks the point about how Kris making the fountain doesn't prove anything. Cause Queen, and I guess that's technically right, but not anymore! In the final act of chapter 2, Queen gives a speech about the creation of the fountain. She says how it was made, she says that any lightner could make one. Well, she wonders about the possibility. It's weird, that whole speech is weird. Queen never speaks like that anywhere else, I think. People say that since Kris saw her explain how it worked, Kris then made the Chapter 3 fountain with this knowledge. But why the heck would Kris plan so far ahead with plugging in the TV so they could turn it on at the end of Chapter 2? And yeah, the pie thing as well, but mostly the TV. Remember this TV for later, it's very important. There's also the door Kris opens. Why did they open the door at the end of Chapter 2? I was kinda dumb and didn't actually know what to think about this at first. Them opening the door doesn't really make sense if they're not the knights, at least I think. It just makes it a little bit more confusing to me. It does make them a bit more sinister, but I hope it's not that. The intent behind this action doesn't have to be wanting to spread the darkness to the rest of the town and the world. People have been thinking that it's to make it possible for Undyne to come in. You can also talk to Undyne about the dark fountains. Why would you do that if you're the knight? I don't know if this actually debunks anything. It seems like they wanted them to come. Turtle even calls the police, so that seems like it's a part of their plan somehow. The game gives you the ability to talk to her about it in both chapters, so if Undyne does end up showing up in Chapter 3, then that makes it clear that that was planned to some degree, like before Chapter 2. I guess I can see why this makes people question it, but it doesn't for me. It still gives you the option to talk about it to Undyne, even if you do Snowgrave, which yeah, we'll get a bit to that later.
But I will say this now, that it doesn't really make sense for Kris to be making these dark fountains for people to escape to as a coping mechanism or whatever, while there's someone else running around making their own fountains. Because Noelle was hurt in that dark world.
Kris could have also opened the door to trick people into thinking that it was not someone in the house, and that the person forgot to lock the door and that they're out there still. Or maybe Kris is just hella stupid. Kris did a lot that night. They ate the pie, plugged in the TV, and made a fountain at the library. They must be very tired. Which they are. They literally fall asleep during class. They sleep through the entire thing. What's something you do when you're asleep? You dream. Dream. And dreaming is something that's actually emphasized. After the Car Kingdom, during the Ferris wheel, and when they leave the Dark World. The Dark World is described as dreams. They're magical worlds where you don't have to think about your worries. Noelle ends up thinking it's a dream as well, just like Susie. I just realized how emphasized that was on my recent playthrough of Deltarune. I did remember how Susie said it was all a dream to Noelle, but there was more. People like to point to this as evidence as Kris being the knight, because the knight had to have made the fountain after Noelle and Berdly sat down. But I think it just seems more like a general theme of some kind. If you don't think this is actually relevant or anything special, then maybe Ralsei could have put Noelle and Berdly to sleep with a spell. I don't believe this, though. It's very stupid, but I saw someone suggest it. There's no hinting at it, but maybe it did. I don't know. Hey, wait a minute! How could the knight have even made a fountain in here? A lot of theories about Kris not being the knight is built upon this closet. This closet. This stupid-ass fucking closet! The closet says that a big body could fit inside it. Whoa, the knight must be hiding there. A lot of Deltarune theories just become needlessly complex if Kris is not the knight. They become even more needlessly complex if you think the fountain was made when Noelle and Berdly went to the library to study and the knight made the fountain without getting noticed by them or the traffic jam in such short amount of time. Undyne should have mentioned a random person walking out the library or something. You even get to see what the creation of a fountain looks like at the end of Chapter 2. That would be extremely hard to miss if you were awake. If Noelle and Berdly went to study there, why would you decide to sleep? How would you be able to fall asleep so fast? It's weird how the knight just happened to be there when they decided to go there and study. Very coincidental. There's so much stuff that happens in such little time. It makes everything much more flimsy. I hate it. I really hope this is what Mr. Fox is doing. You don't have to believe Kris is the knight, but please don't use this closet as evidence for the love of God. I hate it. There's evidence that the knight hiding in the closet is not the case, and it's not how it was. Kris doesn't have to be the knight, and the closet might not be referring to the knight either. So what could this text mean then? A large person could easily fit inside could refer to Berdly's supposedly dead body. It's heavily implied that he's dead, considering his arm hurt after the hurting Berdly's arm in the Queen battle route. The closet could be representative of the city. The large person is referring to the second phase of the Queen battle. Everything else in the library represents something we came across in the Dark World. It's weird that this isn't. It could also refer to Spamton Neo because he big? I heard someone say this, but I don't remember much. Sorry. But what if Kris being the knight is flimsier? No. Alright. Let's get into the debunks. If Kris is the knight, then the game over wouldn't make sense, I heard once. If he died, then Kris wouldn't be able to make the fountains. And what this mystery man says, definitely gaster, wouldn't make sense. How could the darkness fall if we're dead? The game over wasn't really like this in Undertale though. In Undertale, it was someone else's memories. When you're with Noelle, there's no special dialogue for her. You only get dialogue for Ralsei or Susie. This probably means that the game over screen isn't quite what it seems. Gaster might be doing gaster and gastering all over the floor. This might be taken from a completely different context. Wouldn't this be from the future then? It's not from the past, so this does make sense. Yeah, I'll be getting into this as to why this works in speculation later, so this won't make sense at the moment, but it's no big deal. But even then, it's kinda clear that it's taken from a different context anyway, but I don't know how canon the game over screen is. This only really works with the idea that Kris can't live for a prolonged period of time without their soul. Because after all, we're the ones who died. We're not Kris. It was the soul that broke. Kris uses plenty of time to go about their plan. They do move slowly without their soul, but the fact that they can't survive without one is kind of an assumption. For all we know, they can do it just fine. Or not. They're definitely slower. I think them moving without it is believable. Okay, so I didn't know where else to put this part. This is where it fit the most, but just remember it's kind of a joke. People thought Ralsei was a girl for stupid reasons. I'm gonna do the same for Kris being the knight, cause it's a mega video, I gotta include everything. When Kris jumps out the window to cut the tires, we get some sweet dialogue between Susie and Toriel. In this normal playthrough I've been using as footage, it takes
1 minute and 5 seconds
for them to speak. Kris jumps back in after they're done speaking, or whatever. In the speedrun on the other hand, it takes
14
seconds.
I don't know how I messed that up.
Kris jumps back in. Kris was much quicker at doing all that. They're an athlete. You can stay on this dialogue for as long as you want. The longer you stay on this dialogue, the more you make them suffer. That would mean Kris can move for prolonged periods, technically. Susie has the ability to interrupt your dialogue multiple times. So it does beg the question how diegetic this all is. Okay, how about a real piece of evidence against Kris not being able to move without their soul? After the end of the genocide route in Undertale, if you open the game and let it stay open for a while, then Chakara will come back. They will eventually ask you if you want to sell your soul, and that gives you the ability to play the game again. Whoa, would you look at that? No soul. They're not dying. Well, I mean, I guess it's there. This is the best I've got, but either way, I still think this is just an assumption. Kris can walk around fine, but just slow. They would definitely be able to do all this. I don't think it would be impossible for them to make it to the library. They would definitely be able to do it in an hour. A lot more time for stuff to actually happen. That doesn't seem flimsy to me. And it's night. The perfect time to do it. And the night is long. There's plenty of time. The night makes the fountain during the night. See, even the pun is evidence. I don't think them getting into the library is something that doesn't make sense. If you talk to Alphys, then she'll say that there's basically no crime in hometown. You can still access the school after it's supposed to be closed. The same could very much apply to the library, cause, you know, what's the point? If Kris were to get noticed, then I don't think that would get questioned, cause after all, they're considered the weird one. Anyway, this wouldn't be too out of nowhere. Plus it's night, most people are sleeping then. People like to point to the speech Queen gives as evidence. She says, today! Yes, the word today. Today as in a day, as in 24 hours. This part takes place somewhere in the middle of the day, and that's close enough to when the fountain was made. In the middle of the night. I mean, it's not like that's the only word she uses, strangely. And made. And made what? And made what?! Ralsei says that he could sense the dark world. This doesn't do much either. Ralsei isn't the most trustworthy person ever. Ralsei could have decided to not say this information until later, to not have Susie and Kris be worried. He just wants them to be happy. He did the same with the roaring, and I guess spammed them as well, with him telling them to not think about it. So this isn't too out there. Not sure if I think these two lines debunks anything. Maybe the first one, but it's kind of a stretch in my opinion. I have my own line of dialogue to disprove everything. There's dialogue from Sweet Cap and Cakes about Queen changing after the fountain appearing, which implies that the fountain should have been open for a while instead of 10 minutes. Cause it doesn't make sense how so much happened so quickly. Less than a day? Sure. Her changing couldn't have happened before it was made. Doesn't sound flimsy to me. It shouldn't be that little time. It's hard to believe. If it was made with Noelle and Berdly in the library, then so much stuff would have happened so quickly, and it's just weird. I don't understand. It's unbelievable. People say that people would have fallen into the dark fountain if it was open for that long, rather than it being made on the spot from the closet or whatever. Oh yeah, 4 people did fall into it. You proved your own point. I mean, the supply closet being a dark world, that went unnoticed for a bit.
Noelle.
Still thought it was a supply closet. I heard some people say that it wouldn't make sense for Noelle and Berdly to go into the computer lab while seeing it's dark. Like, huh? Kris and Susie went in anyway, they did the same thing. They went in confused, and then fall. That's probably how it went for them. I heard someone say that it doesn't make sense because they would go into the completely dark room and then sit down without falling into the dark world. And yeah, that's stupid. That's because that's not how it happened. The location you leave the dark world isn't exactly parallel to where you fall into the dark world. Kris and Susie literally move rooms the first time they leave a dark world. They do make noise and move before they turn on the light switch. That one is debatable, but the second time they leave the dark world is not. They're standing at the table while Berdly and Noelle are sleeping. Susie and Kris specifically moved. They didn't stand at the entrance. How would you be able to do that if you were frozen in place? If you stand at the place you went into the dark world, when you leave as well, then Kris and Susie couldn't have moved. Noelle and Berdly moving as well isn't unrealistic. Kris and Susie even swap places. Though they do rotate and switch places in that awesome animation, but that's after they've entered through the door. This is too small of detail to matter anyways, so I don't know. People say that they would have sat down to study because the books are open. The books aren't even open, they're closed and stacked over each other. It's almost like they were holding them when they went into the dark world. We also never see the books in the dark world. They probably didn't appear because they were holding them, so maybe it ended up in their inventory. I don't think them not noticing that they moved and were asleep is flimsy either. Susie moved rooms and she was still skeptical of her own reality, and she thought it was a dream, like I mentioned earlier. Even if you don't want to believe that, they might have been too shocked to realize that they moved. Even then, it was getting late, so they were a bit off schedule. They didn't really have time to think. I saw someone mention that Susie didn't think it was a dream, and that she just brushed it off 10 seconds later. But she doesn't. She still thought it was a dream even the day after, right before going back. Despite everything she went through, she still thought it was a dream at first. Thus, it was easy for them to make Berdly and Noelle think it was a dream too. Noelle will actually realize it was real if you go to the hospital during the weird route. People will point out that Noelle literally tells her dad that she fell asleep together with Berdly. In the weird route, might I add. But notice how Rudy talks about Berdly. Him talking a lot and making people tired is the norm. Noelle's reaction shows that too, because this is supposed to be unusual. I don't think he literally makes people fall asleep, but it's clear him falling asleep should be unusual. And it's not like she hasn't gaslit herself before. In the same route, she tries so hard to forget about that dream, but she can't. It's literally the entire point of this whole sequence. People like to use the scrapped opening as evidence for Kris not being the knight, because the knight would be on top of the stairs, and like it's impossible for Toby to represent the knight here metaphorically or have two Krissies. I don't think this opening would be canon even if it wasn't scrapped. So having two Krissies isn't impossible. It's scrapped content anyway, so it's not really canon. What if it was scrapped for this reason? Because they are the knight. Ooh. Actually, we have no idea why this was even scrapped. I don't think it really works as evidence either way. Do we actually know what the knight looks like though? I mean, Kris is literally a knight in the dark world. Well, apparently the knight has long arms. According to JaruJaru, at least. Kris doesn't have long arms, so they're not the knight. Yeah, you get the drill. It doesn't actually say long arm, it says long hand, which means this is very much a stretch. How can someone even have a long hand? But let's look at it. I guess you could use that as evidence, but something being a long hand or arm is an expression, apparently. Broad, far-reaching power of influence, usually paired with a noun, as in the long arm of the law. So how does that work within context? It deigned to create this world, reaching its far-reaching power or influence to the sky. It coursed its will into its blade. It works perfectly fine in this context. Heck, Queen isn't the only one who emphasizes the knight's hand. Jebel also uses the term, the hand of the knight. No long. The video on Queen's Council also mentions the hand. Yeah, I don't really think this is anything groundbreaking. It's just this speech being weird. Gaster is associated with hands, and so is the knight. If you look at how characters perceive the knight, it pronouns get used a lot by multiple characters. It can't be Kris, because you know, he uses they them pronouns. Even then, they pronouns do get used for the knight. The queen uses they in the speech. Both, actually. It's still important to point out that the it pronouns is what's being used the most here, but still, they probably don't know who the knight is or what they are, because they might be hiding their identity with armor or something. Though, Queen shows a knife when talking about the knight making a fountain. She probably based it off of what she was able to see, because that is the same weapon Kris used. We see Ralsei hiding himself, and then people getting shocked at how he looks. Kris could do the same to manipulate them, but I don't actually think that's how it happened. That dialogue from earlier that Sweet Cap and Cake said shows something bigger. A bigger takeaway than Kris being the knight. Ooh! So, Queen says that she just assumed what the knight wanted from their actions. This could very much heavily imply that she didn't meet the knight or she barely talked to them. But there is actually proof in the Undertale 6th anniversary stream of all places that they actually didn't. Toby Fox says that the fountain is somehow responsible for making the king act differently from what he did before.
I mean, I think that fountain definitely changed his behavior. For sure.
This is pretty similar to what the Sweet Cap and Cake said about Queen changing because of the fountain. It could very much mean that neither of them met the knight. It's actually the fountain changing them. It actually makes sense that the knight never talked to the dark nurse like that. For you to leave a dark world, you would have to seal the fountain. Actually, only Kris can seal the fountain. Ralsei even tells Kris and Susie that only Kris can do it. If they met the fountain when Noelle and Berdly were there, then the fountain wouldn't be there anymore if they left. The knight could have been hiding in the dark world, then gotten out of there after the fountain is sealed, but they would have been noticed probably. If you look at the video of the fountain's creation, then it says that it obscures the knight's identity. So yeah, they wouldn't be able to see them anyway if anyone asks. Considering this person not being seen is pointed out, and with how it's phrased, it is most definitely a character we already know. And Toby didn't want that revealed here. Noelle and Berdly did not show up in the video of the fountain's creation. Only the knight is mentioned. The laptop even faced towards them at the end of the chapter, so it would have caught them on the video if it was made when they sat down. It does show that the fountain was made earlier, so they can move stuff around in the rooms. The knight is most definitely a lighter, I think we can all agree on that. If you interact with the laptop after leaving the library dark world, then it says that someone left it on. That's similar to what happened at the end of chapter 2, when Kris turned on the TV. See? The TV came back! Woohoo, yeah! The TV came back! Woo, yeah! That's exactly how far they plan ahead, like I said earlier. That laptop is supposed to represent the queen. There's also a bunch of spam emails printed out in the trash can. This trash can is supposed to represent Spamton. Kris made Spamton! Whoa! But it's worded completely different. It says accidentally, which it didn't do for the computer. That means that whoever left each of these objects in their place were two different people. Anyways, the dialogue from the other kings might seem like they disprove this, but there's some dialogue that shows that the other kings might not have met the knight at all either. Sean says, but recently, a strange knight appeared, and 3 of the kings were locked away. It's pretty vague because it seems like there's a middle part missing, but with how it's worded, you can interpret it as the knight moving the cards they are in the light world. That gives Lightners the ability to not enter the dark worlds to manipulate them. You can also move the stuff in the card kingdom and the cyber world to the supply closet. The Lightners can change the dark worlds. This pattern of objects being moved shows that it's Kris and that they have a lot of knowledge. There are actually some big implications behind all this. Since it's the fountain changing the villains, then that would mean that technically anyone who makes a fountain is a knight. King and queen were just interpreting what they saw. Depending on how you look at this, the fountain might only be changing their behavior. It doesn't necessarily make the person that made the fountain the knight. Now, there could be something we don't know about yet that makes Kris special and makes them the only person that can be the knight. So if anyone makes one, that doesn't make them the knight. Wait, hold on, what if it's the other way around, like people are saying? If Kris only made the chapter 3 fountain, that still makes them the knight. Kris made that fountain, obviously. This isn't secretly Sans or something. There's no way around this one. If they say in chapter 3 that the knight made this dark world, then that doesn't necessarily mean that they are the knight. Yeah, that's right. I'm giving you evidence for your own theory, kinda. We might get Susie Knight, or even Noelle Knight. It's a little funny how Queen shows this while talking about how anyone can make a fountain, and it shows these as examples. Originally, I was just gonna include this image and just allude to this possibly being foreshadowing, but then I realized something. Kris, Susie, and Noelle are the only ones to get the same special reaction from Gaster when naming the vessel or yourself in the opening. It's not because they're the main characters in the story, or because Noelle is the angel or something. The in-universe reason is because they're the people who make the dark fountains. It's not like they don't have the motivation to do it, a place to escape to, or healing a family member. Some of you might ask, everyone is just considered a knight just because they try to make a dark world, just so they can interact with the darkness? I mean, Berdly, Noelle, and Susie are right there, and they didn't make the fountain. Keep in mind that this isn't the only way to interact with darkners. Darkners are objects. People use them. They are objects with purpose. It's also literally how they have pre-established lore. All the dark worlds so far are places that have been abandoned. The abandoned classroom, the computer lab, since the town has no internet at the moment, and the dusty TV. That's why they keep mentioning how the Lightners left them alone. This makes me believe this is foreshadowing. The idea of there being multiple nights is implied through all of these details I've discussed. But then I realized something else. All the names you get reactions from are people that will interact with the Dark Worlds. These are the people who will make the fountains, but these are all the people who will enter a Dark World. Berdly, check. Toriel and Undyne have been speculated to be characters in Chapter 3, so check. Rudy's even on here. Ah, healing family member. Most of the characters on the list do have a character icon. It's just that they are a bit more important. We haven't met Papyrus or Asriel, but they did have one each in Undertale, so they likely have one here too. But then there's QC and Gerson. QC seems like such a minor character, so seeing them on the list is a little strange. But I can actually explain this one. Them being on the list shows us that QC's diner will be a later Dark World location. And because of that, it makes my theory about these names a little bit more stronger. Caddy and her boss will go to the diner and will fall down to a Dark World. And because Caddy's family goes to the diner, because she works there, then Caddy is gonna go there to visit her sister and fall down too. Or maybe those characters are already there, but Susie is the one that makes the fountain. She makes it out of spite just to show Caddy that she knows actual magic. See, a minor character can be on the list unless they're Alvin. Gerson did have a shop avatar, or whatever you want to call it. Considering the emphasis and setup there is for him, it seems like he'll be important enough to have an icon. We haven't met this character just like the goat and skeleton. Well, because he's dead. Is there any way we could see him be brought back to life? Well, are corpses objects? If so, then they can be turned into darkners. I've never been a fan of this location being a dark world because it's outside. So, how do I think he'll come back? Well, he has a drawing of himself by Alvin in the unused classroom. And if you play the game, then you know that objects turn into darkners. Loophole, baby! Why are you showing a picture of Astro? This is why specific characters that might probably be important aren't on the list. Like Des. They are important, but they don't enter or make a dark world. These are probably the later locations we can expect to get. This changes everything. It does point towards Kris when it comes to the library fountain, but Susie could have made it last night, or Noelle could have made it after Berdly fell asleep or something. But, If you ignore the TV, then you can view the whole Goner Maker as you making the night. And then these names are just normal Lightners making a fountain. It would create a nice hierarchy between these names. People have suggested that there could be multiple Knights and who those people can be, but here's like actual evidence for who. I haven't seen anyone else mention this. All this shows that these two theories are connected. The first part of this revelation was the nail, but this was the coffin. This all just started as a throwaway line, but then I just looked more into it. And now I'm 100% confident that Kris is the Knight. I really can't see being anyone else now. A Knight, I guess. There's a lot you can speculate about the game and where it's gonna go. There are things we don't have enough evidence for, so we can't fully know everything. We have to speculate a bit to finish the puzzle. There's one big thing that I wanted to bring up here. I've not mentioned it so far. This is a supposed piece of evidence against the theory, and it might not even be evidence against it. Kris stepping away from the supply closet door for the first Dark World. If Kris is the Knight, why would they be afraid of the door? I think it might be some kind of trauma relating to Gaster. Kris might be reminded of some kind of trauma Kris experienced Gaster, and I think it might be related to Des and the rest of the story as well. In the middle of chapter 2, there's a part where Noelle talks about one night where Noelle, Des, Asriel, and Kris went out to explore the forest behind the graveyard. Behind the graveyard, huh? This might even be the night Des went missing, or at least it shows that they've gone there multiple times. Noelle might be ignoring that this is the night where she went missing. This isn't the first time where she's ignored something like this. She literally ignores that she literally killed a person in the weird route. I think Des got gastered in some way. Maybe, possibly in the bunker, the place with the slow down gaster noises. Maybe Kris experienced it together with Des. They both went through the same, but only Kris got out, and Des went missing. Maybe only Des did, but Kris tried to get her back themselves, but it didn't turn out well for them. If you go down to the bunker in Hometown, after the Cyberworld Dark World, then you'll encounter some classmates talking about the bunker, and then they mention Kris. Susie even asks what's the deal with it, and then brushes it off. This makes the connection even stronger. Either Kris and Des went in together, and only they got out, or Kris is a vessel, and this is where they came from, or both. So Kris and Des went there because they wanted to find out where Kris came from. I don't know, that last one is just a suggestion. Kris being a vessel is just a theory I've heard thrown around, so... If there aren't gonna be multiple nights, which there are though, maybe Kris got gastered and it gastered all over the floor. Maybe no one else can be the knight because Kris experienced this. A lot of people think the Dark Worlds might be Gaster's experiment, at least to some degree. What if the Dark World is a side effect? I think it's probably more intentional, since there is a lot of evidence pointing at him being the strange man, which means he's been there before the fountains. The sprite for the fountain is the same sprite we see in the Chapter 1 opening. The sound that plays when you enter a Dark World is a short clip from the Another Hymn song. All the songs related to Gaster are in uppercase. The Windings Gaster speaking are also all uppercase. The song Gallery is uppercase, and that plays when they're at the fountain right before the boss fights in both chapters. What if the it they're referring to is Gaster? They sense him through the fountain. What if the night isn't real? What if it's just an illusion from any lightener making a fountain and Gaster gastering? There's clearly a connection to Gaster here. The fountain could be making the darkness imagining the night when it's the vessel making a fountain. But considering Spamton says communion, which is straight up a sort of connection / fellowship, that just confirms it. A character is literally saying the night is just a connection, specifically between fountain makers and Gaster. Now the reactions in the opening to the names make a bit more sense considering these connections, since these reactions are about who interacts with the Dark Worlds. Considering we can't see the reaction that comes when you name yourself Gaster, he could have made a fountain, for all we know. I don't know the specifics about the theory about how the supply closet fountain isn't made by the night, but if Gaster made it, then that could be another reason why Kris walked away from the door. It would explain even more why it's a grand fountain, because Gaster made it. There are no halls. It actually just points to Kris. Kris might have experienced Gaster. It's very likely a connection. There's a Gaster motif in Noelle's theme, and Des is Noelle's sister, so clearly there's some kind of connection here. Even thematically, there's a connection. Noelle isn't the scary stuff, she even mentions that in-game, but in the Spamton sweepstakes, we'll learn that she's into video game secrets and Easter eggs. And Gaster? Well, he's literally a secret within the games. A lot of people have been speculating that this unused line of dialogue is Des. That's another thematic connection. Noelle's own sister is a secret within the game. It also shows up when Spamton talks to you at one point. And then he says that it sounded like it was talking to Kris. Maybe Des is trying to reach out for Kris. Or maybe this you is referring to the player. Though I doubt that. It could explain why Kris still makes the fountain at the end of Chapter 2. Even if you do the weird route, even though it hurt Noelle, she would still get her sister back. It could maybe bring the Dreamer and Holiday families back together. All this would tie everything together plot-wise. it would make a lot more sense. Kris doesn't have to be one-dimensional or evil for them to be the knight. This whole speculation thing might be wrong and they might be doing this for a different reason. Or both. I know a few people are gonna ask, why did Kris have such a strong bond with Des of all people? And I do think that the rest of the game will explore that. But if you want an answer right now, I'm just gonna use this random Reddit comment under a post about headcanons. She's a human. She's the only other human in the town. That's the best I've got. It would be a neat turn of events. It would tie Kris's insecurities to other parts of the plot. Considering it's brought up a lot of times, it would be satisfying if she was human too. This is a very speculative assumption with basically no evidence, even if I do really like the idea. Okay, back to proper speculation. Now we're gonna take a departure to a different theory and connect it to the Kris Knight theory, because I think it's important. I'm a big believer in the time loop theory. I don't know if I believe everything that was proposed in JaruJaru's video, considering there's some evidence that magic might still exist, but the actual time loop thing seems likely. Long story short, there's a time loop, a reset of some kind, at the end of the game. All the darkness falls over the world. Some kind of entity, maybe the angel, resets everything back to the start of the entire game. That's what the song Don't Forget is about. They don't want to forget each other, and so on. The time loop theory makes sense thematically, with your choices not mattering. There's one random single letter audio file in both chapters. W in chapter 1, and D in chapter 2. W, D, G, A, S, T, R. Ooh! If you try naming yourself or the vessel gaster, then the game resets. If this naming convention for these files continues, then the game would maybe experience some kind of reset. But there are 7 chapters. But what if there's a 0th or something like that, where we see what happened right after a loop starts? The game over screens in chapter 2 could be foreshadowing to the time loop later in the game, just like how the game over screen in Undertale was memories of someone else. Same applies when you give up on the game over screen. That's literally the darkness falling, the end of everything. That's how we're able to see the future events, because they already happened. Maybe that's what the shadow crystals show. They show the past / previous time loop. That's why the secret bosses went insane. They were meant to show different coping mechanisms for tackling this kind of situation. Ralsei has one too. That's why he knows more than he's supposed to. That's why he knows of the roaring, and Susie's and Kris's name, and gets confused when you do the weird route. It could explain why he doesn't want Kris and Susie to not think about what happened with Spamton. The prophecy was whispered through time and space, which is the phrase connected with Gaster. The first Deltarune teaser was a shortened version of the end of the prophecy in Windings. People think that Gaster was the strange man that made Jevil and Spamton go insane. So he could have done something similar to Ralsei. But in Ralsei's case, he tries to be way more positive about this. He tries to do the best with what he's got. He tries to find meaning in a world where there is no meaning. But what does this time loop theory have to do with Kris being the knight? Do both of these theories fit together? Well, I think so at least. It feels somehow. This time loop thing makes a bit more sense with Kris being the knight. If Ralsei can see the time loop, wouldn't he be able to know who the knight is? With Kris being the knight, the conversation that we haven't seen between Ralsei and Kris might be about Kris being the knight. This could explain even more why he retracted the information about sensing the fountain. The T theory would make more sense. Kris T heals Ralsei the highest. That means he likes them, or at least has a positive relationship on his side. How did this conversation go down? Maybe Ralsei told Kris immediately about the time loop and told him to not make the fountain. What if they still try to hide that from Kris? What if they're trying to stop it while also trying to save Des? Or what if Kris doesn't want to listen to Ralsei and wants to save Des that much? Ralsei might be willing to sacrifice Des to save everyone. This could be yet another reason why Kris isn't too fond of Ralsei. We have no idea if these conversations are positive or negative. He wants Kris to not be the knight. He wants them to change their destiny. He wants to change the time loop. You know that theory about how you have to choose between Noelle or Ralsei? Maybe this is that. I don't think Ralsei is a bad person or secretly evil or anything like that. I don't think so about Kris either. He probably wants what's best for them. It wouldn't make him evil, but it would definitely give him some edge. This is just where the speculation has led me. I'm just trying to write around that. I had imagined Ralsei talking to Kris about them being the knight beforehand, but not much deeper. We don't really know if Ralsei saw everything surrounding the time loop. He might not know who Des is. They could just be talking about Kris being the knight and so on. It might just be me connecting things that don't need connecting, but it doesn't not work, though if it really was the case. I originally had the idea in my head that Kris had a shadow crystal, maybe. It would explain why Kris might have been able to plan so well. I do feel like Kris is more willing to save Des when not knowing about the time loop, but we do get that item anyway if we do the secret bosses. Thanks to Weasel W's video, I was shown that this possibility might not be the case. From the looks of it, shadow crystals might not work for Lightners the same way. It is a shadow crystal after all. Personally, I'm a little unsure what to think. Shadow crystals are pretty weird. I've already dug the hole way too deep. I gotta fill the hole somehow. Maybe they don't work for Lightners properly. Even then, the visions that you do see in the shadow crystals are brief. But if you don't think too much of those things, then I think it could work, but I think Kris's motivation would have to be something else rather than saving Des. Or they could still be saving Des, but there has to be something else there that we don't know about yet, maybe. If you look through the shadow crystals with Susie, then you get a weird look from her. What if that's Susie's reaction to Kris being the knight and destroying everything? Yeah, maybe they work, it's just weird. Kris tried to get in touch with Gaster in some way, so they could get this. Since Gaster knows a lot already, he might know about the time loop. So you know what Gaster did? He gastered all over Kris, and Kris probably figured out how to plan so well. Or they got help from Gaster. I don't know. I think it could have gone along something like that. Story-wise, I think it's all well and sound, but thematically, there's one angle I've neglected to mention. The player. What do they want? I don't think we, the player, wants these characters to be stuck in a time loop. Despite living in a world where our choices are meaningless, Ralsei is quite positive. But if the player controls Kris and wants the same as Ralsei, then Ralsei wants Kris to be stuck in a state of not having choices. I feel like that breaks the characters and the themes. Ralsei wants to break free of the time loop despite everything. That's why Ralsei is getting to us. So far, when talking about Kris's motivation, it hasn't been evil, it hasn't been trying to cause any harm. So who's the one who wants to cause the harm? The in-game entity that's controlling Kris, that's a stand-in for the player, must have different goals than Ralsei and Kris for this to work thematically. It's working towards something else. The only thing that works so far, and it probably is this, is the roaring. The entity tricked Kris into going about this and saving Des so that the roaring can happen. It would still save Des, but the after effect of it all is gonna be the darkness falling. That's why Ralsei is getting to us, because we are controlling Kris. We, or maybe Gaster, gave them the knowledge somehow. But like, they seem to be working against us as well. There's the theory about Kris summoning the player, or the soul themselves. I actually have my own little theory about this. I've always seen Kris as a mixture of both Kara and Frisk, considering their appearance and name is similar to both of them. Unless you pronounce it as Chara. But whatever, if they're a mixture of both, or just Kara, then doesn't that mean they speak like Kara? And if that's the case, then doesn't that mean that Kris interrupted the Gunner Maker? What if this is how they summoned whatever in-game entity we're controlling? My body will now be discarded. No one gets to choose who they are in this world. Your name is... And then you say your name. I don't think this is Kara or some shit being evil or something. I hope we can all forget about this now. I hope this is convincing. Despite it working to supposedly saving deaths, the way Kris feels while under control is strange. Kris is uncomfortable, even though they're trying to get their friend back. I don't really think Noelle is the angel. I've always been instinctually against this theory. It just feels wrong, especially since she's just some random girl and she's relevant in this whole ass religion. I have more to say if it is the player who is the angel. The castle in the legend Ralsei tells us has the Deltarune symbol on the castle. And this is the player town. What you name yourself in the gaster opening or the save files is what the name becomes. The symbol is also literally the characters we play as, and the soul. Spamton talks about the angel and the heaven watching him. We're right there. We're watching him. This Google Doc goes really in depth. It's pretty good, except when it's not. Thematically, it doesn't not make sense for it to be the player. Deltarune, no matter how you look at it, is its own little contained world. Same with every game, movie, book, or piece of art. We like to experience art, good art especially. We like to go through them multiple times. The angel wants the time loop to go on and on and on. We would get more of that gaming commentary from Undertale. Heck, the angel wording was also used in Undertale when referring to the player. Metaphorically, this can be interpreted as the player choosing between being a pacifist or using their fists. Asriel does become an angel themselves. I do feel like saying that the angel in the pacifist route is just Asriel kinda undermines the metaphor and the story, but even then, Asriel becomes an angel because the player chose to go down this route. If you don't do the pacifist route, then Asriel doesn't become an angel. Flowey already had powers to save and load. They're supposed to be like the player, going out of their way to see everything that can happen in a game. They fit the role. It's a vague story that can be interpreted a lot of ways. The angel could be both Asriel and us at the same time in the pacifist route. What if later Deltarune characters that we end up controlling get called angels as well? There are angels or something like that. Maybe everything does point towards her. I don't really have much to speculate about if she is the angel anyway. So wait, how does the character we're playing as know stuff about the plot that we don't? Kris could have gotten the knowledge from Gaster on what to do to save deaths, and we the player are the angel, controlling them. Kris could have gotten the info to eat the pie and to plug in the TV, and that they would get the info on how to make a fountain from Queen. But it would have to be someone who's not Gaster, considering the connections he has with the Dark Worlds. It would be really dumb if he didn't give that info. But I don't know who else this person would be. So it does make me think it is Gaster in some way. Now, what if the entity that's controlling Kris is someone who's helping Gaster, us? It would definitely connect whatever Kris went through with how they know so much, even more. I know the take that the player being bad is a little hot, but there's media that calls out the audience that's still got a claim.
Mrs. Thompson sent me. She's cooking and she ran out of eggs and asked if you could help her out.
People say that if you're considered evil in both routes, then what's the point? Well, you could say the same thing about the universe. You're one random person born on a floating rock in space, where there's gazillion other rocks with them. You're too small for you to have any meaningful impact. The universe is old, and you're just a short second in it. God might not even be real. Who knows? Everything that anyone has ever done is an effect of everything that has happened before it. Someone on the other side of the earth decided to not go outside for an entire day, and it makes the wind particles move in a completely different direction, which will eventually affect you. There's so many factors in life. You don't decide what to do. You don't have free will. How can the atoms and such in your body just decide to do something? They can't. It's just reactions to each other. You don't control the atoms control you. It's all just patterns of behavior and instinct. But you know what? That's okay. Deltarune isn't just gonna be a commentary on how people consume and replay games. It's about life. Life has a path for us. It's all about the journey. Have hope. Don't look at this negatively and expect that nothing will get better. Not with that attitude. Just because you're a short moment in time doesn't mean it's meaningless. Life is a gift. Nothing has inherent meaning. It's the meaning that we give it that matters. Would you still be a good person if you knew that nothing mattered in the end? Ralsei is probably the heart of the game. I think Ralsei's standpoint is what the game wants to promote. You can still have this narrative and not have the player be the big bad or something. Considering the parallels Deltarune has with Toy Story, of all things, then maybe it's not player bad inherently. Don't Forget could also not just be referring to the characters not wanting to forget each other, but also about how you shouldn't forget the characters in the fictional world that you're escaping to. Just like the characters in the game escaping to the Dark Worlds. After all the Dark Worlds are entertainment based. Escapism isn't bad, but also the Dark Worlds and the fountains just being made is a bad thing, so it's a little hard to know what kind of direction it's going in. But what about the control we have over Kris? We might get the vessel later. We get control of the vessel and then we become friends with everyone like we're Jesus Christ or something, I don't know. If this tweet is the case or whatever, and if the vessel is the knight, which is the second best knight theory by the way, then you would need to take control over them. But we would be doing the same thing that we did to Kris. Alright. There's one more thing I wanted to mention about the connection between these two theories, and it's that wouldn't the secret bosses be able to know that Kris is the knight? If they have shadow crystals that allow them to see the time loop, wouldn't they be able to see that Kris is the knight? Wouldn't they acknowledge it? The shadow crystals show your surroundings, so neither Jevil and Spamton would have been able to be there to see Kris reveal themselves. They only see themselves going through the same things over and over again. The secret bosses see the time loop they go through the crystal, because it only shows their surroundings. And then they sense the knight through them making a fountain. So Ralsei knows more because they move around with Kris. I guess the characters just know that this is the knight because of the energy or whatever from the fountain. Gaster, boo boo boo. Queen and King sense them just fine, so I guess it's not too hard to imagine the other ones doing it. Sham also mentioned seeing the knight. Sweet Cap and Cakes could have seen the creation of the fountain and the knight, and then they hear too much about them from the queen. Them just making the dark fountain is enough for any darkner to see it. Kris making the fountain is a way of interacting with all the darkners. They interacted with all of them. That means that Jevil and Spamton knowing about the knight is not a place. Despite that, Sham is in plain sight. He could easily see that someone made a fountain, but still. But let's assume that the secret bosses did see that Kris was the knight. Are there any lines with any subtext where Jevil and Spamton are hinting that they recognize Kris without saying it because they're pussies? No. Since that's the case, I'm not gonna assume that's how it was. Doesn't sound flimsy to me. Okay, that's the end of that section. Bye bye, bye bye, bye bye. Now, there are some points against the Kris Knight theory that don't rely on stuff in the actual game. It's just going out of a gut feeling. I still thought it would be worth going over them here. People are saying that revealing a twist this early is bad writing, cause you're revealing too much, and also Toby Fox wouldn't do this. Even if we know who the knight is, which we do, there's still plenty of mysteries in this game. Like, what does Gaster want? Why is Kris making the dark fountains? Which I tried to speculate about myself. What's the deal with Des? Where will the later dark fountains be? At the same time, the gaps between each chapters has been big. Fans of the game are hungry for more. The most common thing you would hear about Kris right after chapter 2 came out was that Kris was the knight. Nobody was like, yo, WTF, Toby Fox is a terrible writer, ah! A lot of people aren't active members of the Deltarune fanbase and might not have gotten the brain rot. They're not gonna go through every single piece of dialogue. They're not gonna know some obscure line Papyrus said about a closet. They might not have talked to Alvin, the character with no distinct dialogue sound or picture, and no response from Gaster when naming yourself after him. There's a lot to shuffle story-wise, and if it's someone who's not Kris, then that might make things a little bit more confusing for any player. I heard Invincible was pretty good. That reveals its twist early. I haven't seen that, so let's try with something that I have actually watched. Season 1 of The Flash. It actually does its revealing its twist early thing quite well. It makes for some actually good emotional moments and a good mystery. If you want the opposite, look no further than the last decade of animated kids films. Whoa, you guys, Frozen was such a good movie. Except the villain. Whoa, you guys, Zootopia was such a good movie. Except the villain. Wow, you guys, Big Hero 6 was... People have not been too fond of this trend. It appears in more than just Disney films, but this is not a video about that. I can't write a 10-minute section on it. Also, Toby Fox wouldn't do this? How do you know? He's made like one game so far. That's all the reference we have. Oh, and I guess the Halloween hack. Oh yeah, Kris is gonna say the F word. Though, there is actually something I will say that Toby Fox would do. And it's the whole pie thing being a bait and switch. I alluded to this earlier, but if you look at how a character like Sans is written, then it seems like it's all just jokes and gags. He's just lazy and apathetic. But we learn later that these jokes are just him being aware of everything. Our powers and the timelines. In his perspective, he doesn't put too much effort into things because they'll just get reset. Everything get recontextualized. It's neat setup, just like what the pie thing might be. This kind of joke is similar to this, and it's also much closer to something Toby Fox would do than Kris waking up only to eat a pie. Wow, that's super relevant. Basically, my point is that Toby Fox would do this. Okay, but the actual point is that you should explain your points better than just saying Toby Fox wouldn't do this. Use stuff in the game as evidence, not this. There's fan content that feels like stuff Toby Fox would do, or vice versa. But I don't get saying this about theories. Like, yeah, he has a specific kind of writing, but it feels like people are generalizing him. Speaking of writing, if Kris is the knight, then we have a pretty interesting dynamic between the player and the main character we're literally playing as. The themes of choices have been explored, and with Kris being the knight, they continue it even further. Choices don't matter, you know the drill. The secret bosses don't just show different coping mechanisms when being presented with this kind of situation, but they also show different ways Kris tackles with being in control over. And at least in Spamton's case, he seeks control after learning about some kind of groundbreaking revelation about reality. Time loop, maybe. The game has so far made it clear that the player and Kris are different. Kris being the knight would continue this theme. Alright, that seems about right. Kris being the knight makes sense thematically. Kris planned ahead in Chapter 1 by eating the pie, plugging in the TV, and making the dark fountain at the library. They moved objects so they could change the dark worlds. They didn't need to enter the fountains to manipulate the antagonist. The fountain did, which means their identity is hidden. The chapter structure tells it's very likely it's them. They end up very sleepy after the night that they did all of this stuff. And they're able to plan so well because they got contact with some kind of entity. Because they're trying to save Des. So, why exactly do people think Kris is not the knight? Well, I think it's a little bit more than the actual in-game evidence. Like I said earlier, there's been a lot of wait for the new chapters, so people stretch out the game for more stuff to talk about. I don't think it's just that. Noelle, Susie, and Kris. These are relatable characters. People don't want that taken away from them. I don't think Kris is like evil or something. Maybe they are Chara or something, but it has absolutely no relevance. I do think they have some depth to them. I don't think Kris is one-dimensional. I theorized about what I thought their motivation could be, and that wasn't evil, was it? Kris being the knight doesn't mean they're evil. Maybe their motivation isn't this, but it's still not evil. Kris being the knight is kinda the obvious thing, so it feels like people wanted to be contrarian for contrarian's sake. If you dig a little deeper, then you'll see that Kris is the knight. Or maybe, just maybe, Toby Fox isn't the best writer or anything. Toby Fox is a human like everyone else. Or a dog, who knows. He might have made a plot hole or some mistake somewhere. There might be stuff that's evidence that's not even evidence, and it's just him doing some mistake. He's probably made plot holes somewhere, but I don't think it's in the main story with all the focus. This is a passion project after all, so he's putting his sweat and tears into this, making sure he's happy with it. I didn't want to ignore anything, because I do really like the game. I wanted to go all out and analyze everything. I tried my best. If there's anything that I missed that potentially proves this theory or debunks it, then comment down below. This isn't exactly the type of project I've done before. I did have a ton of fun making this. Just kidding! I just wrote that in the script. I have no idea if I'll have fun recording and editing. I actually did have a lot of fun, especially at the start. Though, it was such a new experience, you know, to edit something like this. I just make whatever I want to, but mostly just YTP me's. But as it went along, it definitely evolved into different kind of experience. There were points where I had to go back and re-record stuff or record new stuff because I realized more stuff was going on in this game. Yeah, there were points where I just spoke funny, and there were some bits where I had to restructure it a bit. But overall, it was pretty fun. I actually got like more appreciation for Kris's character and Toby Fox, you know, with all of this stuff. But if this is somehow wrong, that will be a little disappointing, you know. If it isn't Kris, then I'm gonna be a little annoyed because there are some projects that I've lost progress to a lot of that I could have worked on instead, so that's gonna feel a little cheated on that. But overall, I'm pretty confident, though. There were points where I went back and forth, unsure, and then I got confident again. Right now, totally not me recording one last thing, but it feels like pretty solid fact, honestly, after recording some quite small points that I added at earlier segments. I know I've been a little passive-aggressive sometimes. I was just very confident in this. And yeah, I still am. It is mostly just for comedic effect, but also because I'm pretty passionate about this. But I could very much be wrong. None of us are gonna be 100% right. Some people are taking the theorizing a bit more seriously, where some people are just, you know, putting something together just for fun, you know, for an idea. I hope I don't sound too full of myself. I don't know if saying it in the outro is too late, but some people will just generalize you anyway. Everything that I've used in this video is in the paste bin that I linked there. I recommend that you check it out because there's some fan art that I used, and you should support the artists and also the theories and the people that made them. There is not enough space for all of the sources in the YouTube description. Alright, this video is over now. Thank you for everyone who watched this. I hope you're convinced that Kris is indeed the knight, or maybe you think the time loop thing is correct, but not the Kris one. Then, okay, that's weird. I'm not even the creator of that theory. But most of all, you better not believe in the fucking closet!